For you. I am a third-year computer science and math student at UBC, and I have previously worked as a student actuary at Industrial Alliance, where I did a ton of automation work with Excel. So I really love the advanced Excel topics, and I'm really excited to share some stuff with you. So before we get started, I just want to give a quick overview on kind of what we'll be talking about today. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is just kind of what we can do with VBA. Like what are the possibilities? Why does it exist? Why do we automate things? And how can we really level up our Excel skills with automation? And then the second thing we're going to do is we're just going to do a ton of exercises and learn kind of what we can do with coding in Excel. So let's get started. So the first thing is that I have on screen some setup steps. Because the thing is that with what we're going to be doing some coding actually in Excel. So with VBA, we're able to create macros. I'm sure that some of you have heard what macros are, but some of you might not know exactly what a macro is. Basically, a macro is just a collection of tasks done quickly. That's how I would explain it. So for example, something like clicking like Control A, and it highlights all this, you can view that as a macro. Obviously, we're going to be doing a little bit more complex things than just stuff that's built into Excel. But basically, using VBA code, we can kind of do things like that, where we take, a collection of tasks and then make a procedures that runs, really, really quickly. And it's really good for, getting rid of repeated tasks. And to do that, we need to use code. So the coding language we'll be using is VBA, which is Visual Basics for Applications. This is a language that is compatible with Excel, but also all other Microsoft products like Outlook, or not all, I won't say all, most other Microsoft products like Microsoft Outlook, Microsoft Word, Microsoft Access, even the Microsoft SQL servers. And this language, if you've coded before, it's very similar to something like C#, although with some differences that we'll go over. And don't worry if you have no coding experience for this session. That's completely fine. I will be guiding you along, and you do not need any prerequisite coding knowledge. We'll go over everything in depth here. So the first thing we need to do before we start the session is we need to actually set up our coding environment, set up our coding window. So the first thing we need to do is in our Excel application. Do people have Excel open right now, or do we need a little bit more time for that? I think we're okay. Okay, so within your Excel application, we need this developer tool. This developer toolbar is how we're going to be accessing our macros. So to do this, to get this to appear, we want to go to File, then we want to go to Options, and within Options, you're going to get this big Options menu. And then we want to go into Customize Ribbon. And in Customize Ribbon, there's going to be these listed main tabs. So I've already got it checked off, but yours will likely be unchecked if you just have Excel open and you haven't really done macros before. So you're just going to want to check this off and then click OK. And then you should see that Developer shows up at the top here. Everyone good with that? All right. So the next step is to also make sure that we can actually save macros within this file. So macro files are actually different from regular Excel files. This file is a .xlsx file, right? However, a macro file has the extension .xlsm. This just means that we can save macros here. The reason that I did not send you a .xlsm file is because having macros in files can have some security concerns. I could have put malware in that file, and you wouldn't have any idea, right? And that's one of the dangers of VBA, is that it's very easy to do some very shady things with it. So instead, I sent you a .xlsx file so that there's no macro funny business, and I'm not trying to hack your computer. So to actually convert this to a .xlsm file, what you're going to want to do is just go File. You're going to want to Save As. And then you can keep the same workbook name. You can change the workbook name. That's fine. And then you want to change it to a .xlsm file right here. And then you can just click Save. And then now it should be a macro-enabled file. So you see it says .xlsm here. That means that all of our macros will save when we we save this file. You can also choose, your file destination. That's completely fine. So now let's actually get into, coding, right? So we are going to click on Visual Basic up here. This is Visual Basic for applications. We click this, we get this window that comes up. Is everyone here on this window? I don't want to continue too quickly if people don't see this window. Okay, no objections. We will just continue. All right. Actually, I don't think you can see this window based on what I'm sharing. That's probably why I'm getting some confusion. So let me, instead of sharing just the Excel document, I'm going to share my entire screen so that you can actually see what I'm doing. All right. I'm going to share my entire screen here. And so I won't be able to see the Teams channel. So just if you have a question, just feel free to speak up. Okay. So now, if I click Visual Basic, now this screen pops up. So this is what you should see. I know it was a little bit confusing before because I wasn't sharing it. Okay. So this is basically our toolbox, our application that we can use to actually create macros. This is where we will be coding. This is where we'll be setting everything up. As you can see, we've got all of the sheets within this workbook on our left. If you don't see this, you can just click View and then go Project Explorer. And we want to create a macro. That's the first thing we're going to do. We're going to create a macro really quickly. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to insert what's called a module. A module is something that holds a bunch of procedures. Procedures are little bits of code that do something, macros. So if I go insert module, now I have this module and this coding window pops up. Now it's got nothing on it, but that's fine. And I want to name this module something so I don't forget what module 1 is, since module 1's a little bit of a bad name. So to see this, in this properties window to this left, I'm going to go View, Properties window. This will make this show up if you don't see it. And I'm just going to rename this to Test Module. Be careful, do not name this the same name as your macro. It's always good to have like the name module after it so that you don't confuse it with the name of your macro, since that will cause some problems. If you don't understand what I mean, don't worry about it. Okay, so now we're going to create our first macro. So to do that, we're going to go Insert, and we're going to click Procedure. And Procedure will give us a bunch of things. So first, we're going to name our macro. I'm just going to name it Test Macro. And type. What is the type? Well, we are really only going to be looking at subs, maybe some functions. Sub is a sub procedure. It is a macro, exactly how you think of it. It is just something that does something. Functions are a little bit more complicated since they have a return type. We'll look at that a little later, and we won't look at properties today. This scope says basically who is allowed to access this macro. Public means that anyone within this workbook is allowed to use this macro. This means that you can assign it to buttons, or you can have other macros call this macro, or you can just run the macro itself. Private means that only things within the same module can see this macro. So this is good if you're just creating something just for testing, but usually you'll just make everything public by default. So now this is our first macro. This is a little bit of code. Additionally, if you don't want to do that insert procedure, you can also just start it off with just like sub test macro, and then they'll just autofill for you. So as you can see, we've got this sub statement. This means that we're starting our macro, and this end statement, this means we're ending our macro. So all of our actual code will go within here. So let's start with something very simple. Whenever we start with a programming language, it's always a good idea to learn, how do I print hello world? That means just how do I show the statement hello world? So there is a print statement in VBA, but it's a little bit more complicated than other ones. So instead, I'm going to make a pop-up that just says hello world on it. So if you're following along with me, this is how we create a pop-up. We go message box. This will create a message box. And as you can see, we've got a bunch of things that we can put into this function. Don't worry about this result. Don't worry about these optional fields. What we're going to focus on is prompt. So prompt is the message we want to print. So we're going to display that as a string. Just like the strings that we have in Excel, we put quotes around it. We want to go hello world. And then I like to specify the button type. It gives me a bunch of options for button types. I want one that just says OK. All right, so now this is our first macro. Very simple, right? If I press play on here, which means run, this is right up here. If you don't see this on your toolbar, you can also go run and then run sub user form. This message pops up. We did it, our first macro. Now that was quite simple. We can also do other things, like we can specify a title, like, our title. And then now when we run it again, it comes up with hello world with our title on it. Now this is all, fine and dandy. This is cool. We kind of know how to do a macro, but this isn't really doing anything that you would normally do in Excel. This isn't actually fixing any of your problems. So now let's look at a more real world example, something that we actually want to do. So if I move over to the sheet raw data, and you guys can also move over to raw data, then you will see a bunch of actuarial data that I got from Stats Canada. I can share my sources as well in the chat after the presentation for this data set. And oftentimes you want to copy data between sheets. So I want to copy it from raw data to Wrangle data, where we can then edit it. So if we're just doing this manually, right, it's pretty easy to do. We can just, select all of our data, copy it, and then paste it. Boom, we're done, right? But we want to automate this procedure. We want this to be done by VBA. And this is a very good exercise to figure out, well, how can we do that, right? Because if you don't know how to code, you don't know any information about VBA, how can you go from knowing absolutely nothing to copying data between sheets, which seems like it should be easy, but you just have no idea where to start. So the way I think about creating macros, especially when I was, earlier in my VBA career where I didn't really know how to do things, the easiest way to think about it is VBA is like someone that knows everything about Excel and everything about arithmetic, but nothing about anything else. And so to figure out how to automate something, you have to figure out how to explain it to someone that knows nothing except Excel. So we need to try and break down the process of copying this data like that into some step-by-step instructions that Excel would understand. Okay? So let's start creating our macro. Let's go modules. We're going to right-click, and we're going to insert a module. And then we're going to rename it to copy data module. And then we're going to create a sub-procedure called copy data. All right. So now where do we get started? So would anyone like to take a stab at, well, what is the first step in this process? All right. So the first step is actually not what you'd expect. The first step in this process is we need to orientate where we are. Where are we? Because the thing is, we could be running this macro from here, which is, how we usually just intuitively think about it. But keep in mind, we could be anywhere, and we could run the macro, and we don't want to mess things up. We don't want to cause problems. So what we want to do is orientate ourselves. We want to say, or orient, I don't know how to say the word. We want to be able to know where we are. So the first thing we want to do is we want to identify, okay, we need to be on the raw data sheet. Okay, so now let's break this down into code. Go to the raw data sheet, okay? So in VBA, we have things called objects. Objects are basically just things in Excel. They can also be things outside of Excel, but basically you can just think of them as things. And these things can do things, and they also have properties. So the first thing we want to do is we want to specify, hey, Excel, go to this worksheet. So the way we do that is, well, we can find the worksheet by saying, okay, we've got this object called this workbook. This object just points to this entire workbook, this tutorial.xlsm. And we want to go to the worksheet raw data. So I'm going to go .worksheets, raw data. Simple as that. This is now an object that points to this worksheet. And now I want to say, Excel, go to this worksheet. So I'm going to go .activate. So now let's put together what we did. Let's go to raw data and let's see what happens when I run the macro. If I go copy data, seems like it did nothing. That's weird. Now let me go to a different worksheet. Let me click run. Oh, keeps doing this. So it is doing something. So Excel is moving to raw data. So that's good. That's a step one. Step two, we want to select all of this data. Okay. So how was I doing it before? I was doing it with Control Shift right and then Control Shift down. I also could have done it the reverse order. However, I think the simplest way to do it is if I click Control A, that will select all of my data. Okay, so how can we mimic Control A but with VBA? So what we'll do is we need to specify, well, where are we clicking Control A from? And I think a good anchor point is A1, because I think this is always going to have data in it. So we can go A1 and then Control A. So first we need to select A1. So A1, this, as you know, is a cell in Excel, also known as a range in Excel. So ranges, cells are just like one single thing, whereas ranges can be a collection of cells. So A1 is both a range and a cell, but then A1 to B1 is just a range with 2 cells in it. So we can either do cells 1, 1. However, this looks a little bit, complicated and looks a little bit dirtier on the eye. So instead, we're going to use this range function, and this will give us the actual cell we're looking for. So we want to specify where we want to go. So we're going to go to A1. We're putting that in quotes because we want it to be a string. And so now this gives us that range object. This gives us A1. And so now we want to select the entire thing. So we've got this range A1. We want to select the entire thing. So how do we do this? Well, there's a property called current region. I don't expect you to know this at all, and we'll go over a different way to do this since this is a little bit of a cheat way just to kind of speed things up. But you can click .current region, and this will give you the entire region. And then I can go .select, and this will select the current region. So now let me click run again. As you can see, it selected everything. So now we want to copy this data. Well, lucky for us, there's actually a method called .copy. So instead of selecting this, why don't we copy it? And now let's see what happens when we run this. Oh, look at that. Looks like it was copied. And if I go and manually paste it, looks like it worked. Okay, so now we just need to figure out how do I paste it. So first, before we think about pasting it, we need to wash out. We need to navigate between sheets. So as you remember, we can just copy this line here. And instead of activating raw data, we want to go to wrangle data. All right. And then after this, we want to paste it. And we just want to paste it in the top. So we're just going to go range A1. A1, and then we're just going to paste it, right? Now, the issue with this paste method is that what happens if we had like some weird formatting here? We had like a bunch of, some red or something like that. I don't really want to copy over some highlights or something like that into my wrangle data. So instead, I want to specify like exactly what I'm pasting. So if I want to paste everything, instead of using this .paste method, I would use .paste special. And then it gives me a bunch of options. And so the thing for pasting all is XL paste all right here. But instead of that, I only want to copy over the values from raw data. So instead, I will do XL paste values. All of these possible values that kind of pop up for you are all the equivalent of when you copy something and you right click and you see all these paste options. It's basically the same as that. The real thing to think about is anything that you can do manually in Excel, you can also do with an automated process. And usually it'll correspond like very one-to-one with manual and versus automated processes. So now I do range A1 dot paste special XL paste values. Now, before I do anything, I'm going to save. I'm going to Control S, or you can save up here. And the reason I'm doing this is, let me run this. All right, sweet. We got our pasted result. Everything worked. Now let me Control Z to get rid of all this data. I got an error noise. I don't know if you heard the error noise. Basically, when we run a macro, everything that happens within the macro is permanent. We cannot undo it. So you have to be very, very careful when you're running macros as to not like ruin something. Because the thing is, when you're writing macros, you're going to make mistakes, guaranteed. I still make tons of mistakes all the time, right? And so instead of trying to just, like you read your code 5,000 times to figure out if you have one little mistake, that's going to waste your time too much. Instead, what you want to do is just mitigate the problems that can happen, right? Now, if you're having something that's editing another workbook, you should be very, very careful. But if you're just editing your own workbook, what you can just do is save beforehand, run the macro if anything's messed up. Then you just can close the file and then go back to your previous save. All right. So that is copying data. First of all, do we have any questions so far, or any issues that have come up for people? And keep in mind, I can't see raised hands, so just feel free to unmute if you want. Okay, sweet. So one thing is that sometimes when you run a macro, it's difficult to figure out if you're done the macro, because sometimes macros can seemingly run forever. So it's always a good idea to say like, hey, this macro is done. And the easiest way to do that is from our message box before. So we can do message box, and we can say macro complete. We go VB OK only. And now if you run this, it says that we finished the macro, which is really nice because then we know that it's done. Since sometimes you're going to accidentally end up infinitely running something and you're never going to know if it's done or not. And so that's a great way to tell yourself, hey, this macro is complete. All right. Instead of going over some different ways to copy worksheets, because there's always multiple ways to do things in VBA, I think for the interest of time, we are going to move to this playground tab. So everyone please move to this tab. And this tab has a bunch of small exercises to kind of get familiar with some concepts of VBA, and then also just to do some simple different tasks so that you get familiar with a bunch of different things. And then I will send this file out completed so that you have all of it as reference. So let's start with the easiest task. Task 1, copy formulas. Now, we already did copying data, so this should be pretty easy. We already kind of know the basics. We can kind of just use what we've learned here. So let's start with task 1. First thing we want to do, set up our module. Insert module, and let's name it task 1 module. All right. And then we're going to create the macro task 1. And then we will start making it. All right. So we want to copy the formulas to the right without affecting the existing columns. All right. We can do that. So does anyone want to tell me the first step in our macro? Well, if we remember from our copy data module, we have to orient ourselves. So we need to figure out what sheet are we in. So First thing we'll do, this workbook dot worksheets playground dot activate. Beautiful. Now we're on the right sheet, no matter what. Next thing we want to do is we want to copy these formulas. So we want to go like this, copy it, highlight everything, and then paste formulas. Perfect. All right. Now I just control Z to get rid of that. All right, so let's start with just the copying step. So if we remember, we want to specify that we want B8 to B9. Okay, so how do we do that? I know how to get B8. I could do range B8, but then how do I get B9, or B8 and B9? Well, range can work exactly like you do in Excel. So like in Excel, when you go like, okay, I want to get both of these two cells, so I highlight both of them and get this. What you can do in VBA is the exact same thing with B8 to B9, exactly like that. Plus, you don't have to worry about absolute or relative references. It's great. So now we're going to go range B8, B9, and we're going to go dot, sorry, I lost my train of thought, dot copy. We're going to copy this. Then I'm going to make a space here just for clarity. Then we want to paste it in this big range. So this will be range B8 to D9. However, I want to do this a different way. I want to use my cells now. So I know how to get B8 using cells instead of a range. B8 would be if I have cells, I want to have a row index and a column index. My row index would be 8. And my column index would be B, which corresponds to 2. Just because it's the second letter of the alphabet. Don't worry about that error that popped up. Okay, but now how do I create a range out of these cells? Well, range doesn't just work with strings as identifiers. It also works with other ranges. What you can do is you can have the top left and bottom right cell, and you can specify the range with that. So just like if I click the top left cell and then hold shift and click the bottom right cell and I get this full range, it's the exact same thing in Excel. So I could do range cells 8, 2, and then specify the other cells, which is the bottom right, which will be D9, which will be 9 as the row, 4 as the column, and I could do dot paste special. And this time we want the formulas only. So instead, I'm going to scroll down, look for the formulas, and boom, we've pasted it. Now, of course, instead of this, we could have just done B8 to D9, and that works perfectly too. So don't worry if you need to do that. I'm just giving you other methods that you could use in this range, which can be very, very useful. All right, so now we've got that.
By the way, how do you comment on, can you comment?
Yes, you can. I actually am going to comment soon, but I can comment now instead. So if you want to write a comment and you want to say like exactly what this does, you instead of doing like slashes, you can do an apostrophe. And then you can say, this copies these cells. And that will be your comment. And so now when you run this, it doesn't run this comment. And so this is useful for just, telling users what your code does. However, I still notice something really ugly. Why is this still copied? It's really annoying. It's still in my clipboard. Like I could still paste it. That's kind of weird. I want to get rid of that. I think that's really weird. So you know how you can press escape in Excel to get rid of the, I don't want to say the VBA term, the copy mode. Instead, you can do that in Excel. So the way we do that is we need an object again, because we need to find, well, how do we press escape, basically? And the object that we have is application. Application is Excel itself, not just the workbook we're in, but Excel as an entirety. And we want to, and it has a bunch of properties with it, mostly just settings. One of those settings is cut copy mode. This just tells us, hey, are we copying something right now? And we can set it to false. And so when we run this again, now it gets rid of that. And again, let me delete this, just proof that it's actually working. Last one, boom. However, you might come across an issue. What happens if you make a typo? Uh-oh, you did that. And then you run D8 to D10. Oh, it actually doesn't do anything. That's the wrong one. To E9. There we go. Now we've got these issues here. Now, the thing is, that's a very easy thing to spot, right? That like we had an error here. But I think it's a good idea to go over, well, how would you figure out that that was the issue? Well, what we can actually do is within this, we can run each line individually. And so that's the biggest debug tool I'm going to give you today, is that when you're working through a macro, you're actually able to run each line individually. The way we do this is if we click debug and step into. This would come up with this yellow line, and we can move this around to show like what line we want to be on. So if I just go in order, if I press F8, or if your computer has some sort of lock on it, it might be function F8. We skip the first line. If I press F8 here, and let's say click here, it runs that line. Now watch out. You want to make sure that you're not like disorientating yourself, right? Like if you click here and then press F8, it's going to copy the wrong thing because we're in the wrong place. So make sure that you always go back to where you're supposed to be. Don't run your macro out of order. So if we go here, we can see that these cells copy. Okay, that looks good. So now let's see what happens here. Paste special. Uh-oh, we pasted here. Now I want to fix this. Okay, let's delete all this. And let's redo this. So if I drag this yellow bar up, I can press F8 here, and it redoes the line for me. And then that gets rid of that. That ends the procedure. And again, always good to tell yourself the macro is done. So it's good to say macro complete. VB OK only. All right, perfect. Now let's do something much more challenging. Task 2 is we've got a bunch of named ranges. Now, named ranges are something that a lot of very experienced people in Excel still don't know, even though it's extremely, extremely useful for macros. Name ranges are, let me see if I can find one. I did find one. So name ranges are actually, every range has a name. These are actually not their real names. This A1, this is its name. Its name is A1. And all of these cells always have that name. They always have like L2 here. Even the named ranges, this one that says flag here, is actually still also G12. And that's how we're kind of referencing it with these range objects, is this is the name of that range. Now, we can also create custom names. So you see here, if I drag this down, we've got a bunch of custom ranges that we can find. We got this range 1 right over there, and range 2 over down there, right? And we can use this to kind of anchor ourselves. Now, what would be the point of naming ranges? Well, there's actually a really, really important thing. So let's say we've got a macro that takes this, and it's got, we have data in cell B4. Now, someone comes along and wants to format the sheet since this looks really ugly. So they create a column here. And now if we just had formulas, let's say we undo this, we have a formula that references B4, right? it just says equals before. If we insert a column here, it references C4 now. Perfect. Everything's working just as planned. However, if we have a macro, let me create task2 module, sub task2, and it goes range b4 dot copy. So this works great here. If I go task2, it copies the range exactly. Now I insert a column here. Oops, I got copied cells. I insert a column here, but VBA, when I run this again, is still referring to B4, which is a big problem. Because that means if anyone messes with your sheet after you create the macro, you have to redo the macro. And that is a huge time waste and really, really annoying. So instead, what you can use is a named range. So let's make this, let me delete this column, and let me call this data. So now instead of referencing B4, I reference data. I say range data.copy. And it copies the right cell. Perfect. But now I insert a column. What happens when I do this now? It references the correct place. Because this data named range has moved. And so name ranges are an extremely helpful way to anchor yourself within a workbook so that other users can do formatting things and can mess with the workbook without your macros all just suddenly breaking. And so this will save you a lot of time and energy when you actually start creating more large-scale macros. And so it's good to learn it right at the beginning so that you know that this concept exists before you actually have to start doing it. So another thing you can do with name ranges is that instead of just having, these are just values, these are single cells. Instead, you can name an entire larger range. So let me just name this name range. And now if I go name range here, it shows up with this entire table. You can view all of your previous ranges in this name manager. It will pop up. You can see that this one doesn't exist anymore because it deleted the sheet. I'll just delete that one. But it gives you all of the previous possible ranges that you've defined and also lets you redefine them down here. All right. So now let's actually get into the task here. The task at hand is you have to find the above name ranges, highlight them red, and then place them in place the corresponding message in the cell. So we're going to go through this table. We're going to find this range, this name range, and we're going to put this message in it and highlight the cell red. All right. Seems simple enough. But you're going to find that we're going to come up with some shortcomings. So let's start with the first one. We're just going to go range G4. And we want to extract this value from it. So what we can do is we can get the dot value component from it. And so now we've got that range value. Now the thing is we want to store this somewhere. And so you can actually store variables just like in other programming language. So we can have, let's say, a string variable, which is like a word. And we can declare that as, let's say, we'll call it name or range name. Now, when we just do this, when we say range name equals this, range name could be anything. It's declared as a variant. What we want to do is say, hey, this is explicitly a string. This way, when you have issues that pop up, when you're debugging your macro, figuring out, well, what's wrong with it, it's really difficult to do when it's just a variant. So instead, we want to declare our variable. So the way we declare it is we go dim, and our variable is range name. And we say as, and we put a string. So remember, string is a word, just like a string in like an Excel formula, equals hello, where you put quotes around it. It's exactly like that. And then we also want the message. So let's go message equals range h4 dot value. However, and then I'll declare this message as string. If you're uncomfortable with having these on the same line, instead you can just have it on a separate line, dim message as string. All right. So here, I'm already noticing that we're going to want to do the exact same task like 6 times. And in most Excel sheets, I made it small. But in most Excel sheets, you're going to be dealing with thousands and thousands of rows, maybe hundreds if you're in a smaller company. And so this type of method where you're doing every single thing manually is just not going to work, right? So we need a way to do every single thing the same way. And we can do that with a loop. There are many different types of loops, but basically loop is just you go through something and you do a repeated task through a bunch of things. So what I want to do is I want to take each row and do something with each row. So to do that, I'm going to do a for each loop. So first I want to specify, well, what table are we working with? And we named our table name range. So I want to declare a range variable, dim name. Oh, it's hard to have name range and range name. I should have thought of that earlier. Let's go with name table as range. So range is these range objects we've been working with for the entire session. Now, if I just go name table and I set this to range, name range, and then I start to run it. Huh, runtime error. What happened there? I did the exact same thing as these. These work. What's wrong with this? Well, you'll notice that range is not highlighted blue. So there's kind of 2 different types of things in VBA. I've already been alluding to having objects. Objects are just like things like properties of Excel. Whereas values, value types, string is technically not a value type, but we'll just consider it a value type. Values are like numbers or words or things that objects can hold. You can think of it like that. And so these value types, we can just set them instantly. We could just go variable equals this, and that's set. That means that this variable contains g4.value. It contains this. But with a object, we need to have this set statement. We want to say set name table to this. So now that we've got that out of the way, that little piece of information, let's continue with our macro. So instead of grabbing these values, I want to grab the relative row. So let's go through each row. So how do I go through each row of name table? Well, we are going to have a for each loop or for next loop. So what I'm going to do is for row in name table dot rows. Oops. For each row. I forgot to write the each. And then next row. My bad. See, I still make mistakes all the time. Okay. So this dot rows will give us each row in this range. So this will give us this row, this row, this row. Okay, great. But now I need to extract the values out of those. So range name, how do I get this first value? Well, each range also has cells. That's why I talked about cells earlier. So if I go range name equals row dot, you'll notice that nothing pops up. We'll go over that later. Dot cells, and then I want to get the first cell. So that's going to be 1, 1. And the reason being is that it's if we've got this row, it's in the first row of this row. Now this row is only one row, so that's self-explanatory, and the first column of this row. Now I've realized I've actually forgotten to do something. This row is also in itself a variable. So instead, I need to declare. I'm going to go dim row as range. And now you'll notice when I work with it the next time, like when I set message, now a bunch of properties pop up. So now VBA knows exactly what I'm doing. So let's go row.cells. And now we want to get the row, first row, and we want to get the second column. So now we've got the range name and the message stored up. Okay, great. So now we've got these. So now we want to find that name range, highlight it red, and put the message in. So let's start with putting the message in. So the first thing we're going to do is exactly what we've been doing this rest of this section. We're going to go range. And then we're going to go range name. Since this is just that string that we were holding. So instead of just putting the string in directly, instead we're putting in this variable. And we're going to go dot. Actually, we don't even need to go dot. And we're going to set it equal to message. We can also put dot value equals message. Either way, it's the exact same thing. Basically, we just want to put the message in that range. Okay. And then next, I want to highlight it red. So I'm going to go range name dot interior dot color equals VB red. Okay, now that's a little much, right? I just memorized that, but the thing is, how would you ever figure that out? Well, there actually is a way other than just Googling it, because you can Google it, of course. And it's my favorite use of the macro recorder. So you may have noticed earlier in this session that there is this button called record macro. And you might have been wondering, well, what is that? Or you just ignored it, like I probably did when I started learning VBA. And this allows you to create a macro based on your inputs. So if I click Control, a record macro, and I do something, let's say I copy these cells, and then I paste formulas, right? If I then stop recording and go back to my Visual Basic, you can see that there's this new module, and now it's got exactly what I did. Now, this is really, really ugly, but it is a good way to learn stuff. And one of the things that it does is it shows you how to do things in VBA. So you can see that it showed us that, oh, we use paste special to do this Excel paste formulas. Now, it looks really ugly, but hey, it showed us something. That's good. It even showed us this cut copy mode stuff. Interesting. So why don't I use the macro recorder to figure out how to make something red? So let's record another macro. And let's just make this cell red. And then I stop recording. And when I go back to the module, let's look at macro 2. Oh, this gives us a huge bunch of stuff, right? With selection.interior, oh my God, there's so much stuff. But the way I read this is I say, okay, I selected range K5. That's this. And then I did these things. And remember, we can always step into the macro to see exactly what it's doing, you know, step by step, right? And then you can look at it on your own time. We're running a bit low on time, so I'm not showing every single step. But this is a great way to learn, hey, interesting, this is selection.interior.color method. So what are our field? So instead, if I go back to task 2, I could use this .interior.color equals VB red. You can even just copy that part of the recorded macro and just paste it in. And it's a great way to really learn how to use a language, is to record yourself doing things, and then you put it into your own real macros. Since I wouldn't recommend making an actual macro out of a recorded macro, since it's really ugly, really hard to debug, and doesn't really help you learn much. But if you use it to learn, it is fantastic. Recording macros is great. Okay, and then going back to this. Actually, I want to make that white. Going back to this, I also want a message box saying that macro complete. BB OK. All right. And now if I run this, actually, I've forgotten something. If I activate the worksheet, playground.activate, now I can run this. And wow, it did everything. It found all the name ranges and put exactly what we want in there. Again, I didn't save before this, so this will be a little bit of a pain to clean up. So remember to save before you actually run your macro. But anyways, this is fantastic. Now, the thing with loops, right, is now it's difficult to debug, since now if I start debugging and step into, when I go through this loop, it just keeps going. And what happens if I want to find something that happens over here? And the thing is, I have to press F8 every single time. That's just going to be a huge pain, right? What I can do is I can set a breakpoint. I can go like this. And now when I step into, I can instead just press play. And now it skips over everything. It actually ran it really, really fast. And now it gives me this macro complete option. So now we're stuck here, and now we can slowly press F8, and then it happens. So setting breakpoints is a fantastic way to pause your macro at a certain part. So again, I clicked this left bar beside the line. I clicked debug step into, and then I clicked run, and then it went to this line and did not run it yet. So this is a fantastic way just to help yourself like figure out what's wrong with your macro when something does go wrong. Because it will, sadly. And then if you want to get rid of it, you just unclick it. Simple as that. Last debug thing I want to show you is that if I view this locals window, and then I debug and step into, oops, I have to click the thing, debug step into, we can see that we've got all of these variables that we have, and we can see all of their values at every point in time. So if I start going through, oh, name tables exists. That's really hard to read that one, so let's continue going on. But now we can see, oh, we got range 1 and first within message and range name. And this is a fantastic way to just monitor what's going on. You always have to use step into, this debug step into for it to work. But it's a fantastic way to debug. All right, so we are slowly running out of time, so I'm going to leave these to you to figure out. Since you have all of the tools to figure this out, and you don't quite have all the tools to figure this out, but I will teach you a small thing about that right at the end, just so that I give people a chance to leave if they're busy. The thing that I really want to bring up is this task 5, this note on security. So I'm going to create a new module. And this is a really key thing to bring up. This is the most important thing that I'm going to bring up. So if I create a sub, VBA allows you to do a lot, and I mean a lot of things. For instance, I was able to create malware with VBA within like the first month of using it, which is pretty quick. Creating malware is very, very easy with VBA. And so you really want to protect yourself. And one of the biggest mistakes that people make is not realizing that they're doing something forever, not realizing that they've created something that persists beyond the way they've run their macro. So a lot of the times we might want to say, hey, application stop displaying alerts. And this is common. You know, you will want to turn off displaying alerts because let's say you're closing a file that's like too big and it always gives you alert like, hey, do you really want to have this in your clipboard? It's like, you know, you just want to get rid of that. And that's completely fine, right? And then also sometimes you might turn off calculation equals XL. Sometimes you might turn the calculation to manual. Ugh. Because sometimes you've got a bunch of formulas, and while you're running the macro, it's just chugging because the formulas keep recalculating as you keep changing the data. And then you want to do something. Like let's say you want to, I don't know, you want to copy that range string dot copy. Let's say you just want to copy this string. And then maybe you want to, I don't know, increase this number by 1. I don't know. But the way we do that is, let's say we declare a variable and we say like, oh, this is a string, right? We declare a str as a string. Or as a, actually, let's do the reverse. Let's do it as a number, which is an integer. Now we accidentally declared this wrong. And so I'm going to say, okay, str equals range string dot value. Now this is not a number, and we already know that this is going to fail. And then at the end of the macro, I am safe, and I say, okay, let's turn the alerts back on. And then let's change the calculation mode. Okay. So we've been really, really safe with our macro. We've said, okay, we turn off display alerts, and then we turn it back on at the end. Perfect. And then we turn on the automatic calculation in our Excel at the end. Fantastic, right? Now let's run this. Uh-oh, type mismatch, debug. All right. And that's fine. I'll just stop it. Let me show you something. Uh-oh. Our thing isn't calculating. And that's because we stopped our macro prematurely because there was an error here. And that means that this hasn't happened yet. We've still got automatic or manual calculation. Now, this is a fine enough thing. All we need to do is just go to formulas, go to calculation options, automatic. Perfect, right? So now how do I change this display alerts thing? You can't. And that's the crazy thing. You cannot change this without doing this within the macro. So if I comment this out, now display alerts is true. But the thing is that you might not notice that you've permanently set display alerts to false. And so that's why you need to be really, really, really careful with when you create macros. You need to make sure that you really understand what you're doing and that you have all the safeguards in place. So instead, if you have something that you're doing, you should always have it like around the line that you want to, turn off the errors for. So let's say closing a file. So that if there is an error, oh, I should set display alerts to true. I should rerun this macro and set display alerts to true. Or you can create like a new module to do that. So be very aware of that stuff, and also be very aware that you could make mistakes, and those mistakes will be permanent. So be very careful with when you create macros. Now, I don't want to discourage you from creating macros. It's really powerful, but it is good to know that you really need to watch out, because you've got a lot of power with what you're doing. Okay, that is time. But what I might do is, if people are interested, I will go over this, a small thing in task 4, just to show you if statements. But feel free to go, since the session has technically ended. Okay, yeah, let's quickly go over this task 4, since you can figure out task 3 just from what we've done here. So task 4 is, I want to prompt the user whether they want to change the background color. Instead of performing this action 3 times, I'm going to just do it once, because we're running low on time. So I'm going to insert a module, task 4 module, sub task form. And okay. So now the first thing is, if I click this, nothing happens. And that's because I need to assign a macro to this. So what I'm going to do is right click and assign a macro. And you can see that we've got this task 4 created. I'm assigning the macro. Now, if we click this, it does task 4. We can't tell that anything happened, so let's put a message box. Oh, message box. Macro complete. VB okay. So now, if I go back and I click this, it gives me macro complete. Okay, so that's working. That's all rigged up. So what I want to do is figure out whether the user wants to change the background color. So first of all, let's make a named range. As we were doing before, let's make this named range so that we don't have to figure out where on the sheet we are. Let's call this background. All right, so now we've got that set. So let's orient ourselves. So let's go this workbook, dot worksheets, playground, dot activate. And then now we want to change the background. So, but we only want to do it if the user tells us to. So first we need to display the message. So we can do that with message box. Do you want the background to be green? And now I want to give them the option to say yes or to say no. Now, in my original exercise, I made it a little bit more complicated than that, but we'll keep it simple for now. Okay, but how do I get the result of this? Because the thing is, I can run this. Do you want the background to be green? Yes, no, but I don't get anything, right? Now we can actually store the answer to this, because what happens is that the code actually stops here and waits for us to get to this part, like answer the question, to click yes or no. And so we can actually say declare dim, let's call it answer, as VB message box result. And I can say, okay, answer is equal to the result of this. This is whether I press, whether I press yes or no. Now, I want to figure out, well, if I do one thing, I want to do one thing, and if I do another thing, I want to do another thing. Well, it's exactly the same as if statements in Excel, where you go like equals if this, if you've seen that from the intermediate Excel session. It's just now we do it in VBA. So we want to say if, and we got some question. I'm just going to put ... Then it's going to come up with an error. Don't worry about that. And then I want to specify end if. It means I'm done asking questions. So I want to see if answer, and I want to check if the answer is yes. But I don't really know what this looks like. Now, luckily, it gives me a bunch of options. So it looks like VBS is probably yes, right? So let's click that. If answer equals VBS, then let's change the background color. So this is just exactly what we were doing before. So that's just range, background was the name, dot interior, dot color is equal to VB red or VB green, right? And what happens if I want to do something else? Like maybe I want to say like, oh, if your answer was no, then do this. Well, just like how in that if statement in Excel, there's that logical test value of true, value of false. Instead, we have this else that we can do. Else is like our value if false in Excel. And so here we can put down whatever we want. Like let's say we want to tell the users like, oh, too bad. VB okay only. Now let's try working this. Let's save before we run. Let's click the button. Do you want the background to be green? Well, yes, I do. Ooh, it made it green. Perfect. Now let's change this to white and let's see what happens when we click no. Okay, let me save again. Do you want the background to be green? No. Aw, too bad. So as you can see, it went through all those stages of the if expression. If the answer was yes, we went here. If the answer was, no, we went here. You can also do the reverse. Let's say you want to say it's not yes. Well, the not symbol in Excel is not like this, which many programmers might like to put. It's actually this. This means if the answer is not yes. Now, don't do this, obviously, because then it just is really confusing, because then you click no, and then it does it for you. That's really annoying. So instead, make sure you're very clear with what you're doing. Now, why is this part important? Why did I actually want to show specifically this? Well, when you run a macro, let me just remove all this stuff since this is, when you run a macro, it's oftentimes a good idea to give the user an option to not run the macro. Because sometimes a user might be accidentally clicking around, copying stuff, and they might accidentally click this module. And it's like, oh no. And sometimes the macro will just run. So instead, what you can do is you can say, hey, do you want to run the macro? VB yes, no. And then if the answer equals VB no, then we want to end the macro. And the way we could do that is exit sub. And this just tells us, hey, stop what we're doing. Don't do anything else. Don't do anything because the user said no. Another way to do this, which I like to do, is say if the answer is not yes. Because sometimes you have more than one option. Sometimes you have like cancel. So it's good to just say not yes. So instead, I'll say if the answer is not yes, leave. And we can see that if I click this and say no, oops, macro complete doesn't run. And so this is a great way to guard your macros from other things. So that is pretty much it for what I have today. I do have a debugging exercise, which uses a lot of the tools that we had here, but in a more realistic application with an actuarial model, a really simple one, but a small actuarial model that I created, where I've created a macro that updates the model, and you have to find the bugs within the model using kind of the stuff that you learned today. So that's all. Does anyone have any questions for me? And I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Matthew. Just want to say it was really well done. You explained things really clearly, and it was really easy to follow along. So hopefully everybody agreed with me. So thank you so much for doing this.
Yes, no problem.
And for the rest of the people who'll be doing later, we'll be sharing the video link as well as the link to the file. If we don't have any other questions, then we're good to go. Thank you so much, Matthew.
Sure. And I sent the debugging exercise to Kanav, and he'll send that to
Awesome.
you, I hope.
Yep. With that, I will stop the recording now.